So, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Talent Finders would like to welcome Anu Bhardwaj, founder of State of Women podcast network, Women Investing in Women Digital and Blockchain and Digital Asset Influencers. So, welcome, Anu.
Hi, how are you?
Good, and you?
Awesome.
So, firstly, I would like to congratulate you on all your achievements. Can you please share with us how your career started?
So I have a unusual track the whole way through. I went to Georgetown University and I studied art, music, and theater with a concentration in art history. And I had a father who was really adamant that I prove I was brown and study something sciencey. So I did biochemistry as well.
Yes.
And the thought was maybe I'll go to medical school. And I realized I just did not want to go to medical school. I just, my entire family, they're all physicians. And for me, like, I wanted to do something global. I wanted to be international. And I had studied at Georgetown University, which is a phenomenal school for international, anything international, really.
Yes.
And so I had my sights set on the world from the very start. And when I finished my studies, he said, you have two options. You're either going to medical school or you're going to get married.
Wow.
And I said, I choose the third option. I'm basically going to leave. And and I ended up leaving my house with very little money, 2 suitcases, packed up, and said, I'm going back to Washington. I have a full scholarship. I'm going to go to grad school and I'll figure it out. Like, I need to see the world before, I need to know the world before I can change it. And that was the one thing I was like, I knew for sure I had to do in order to get to my goal where I am today.
Yes.
So ultimately, I left and went back to Washington, D.C. I won $500,000 in scholarships and grants.
Wow, that's amazing.
Thank you. And I believed in myself. I knew I could do it. And so I just kept applying, just kept winning, and ended up in Singapore for my second year of grad school. And once I got to Asia, I was like, okay, this is where my crazy journey is going to start. And I ended up doing an independent study on indigenous remedies for HIV in children, working with monks, shamans, and healers. Now, what does this mean? This means in 2000, we had this HIV, it was a pandemic, just like what we're having now with COVID. HIV, really, really big. And you're from South Africa, so you understand, like, it was just out of control. And in Southeast Asia, especially in like Thailand and Cambodia and various parts of Southeast Asia, it was going out of control. And I had decided I was going to work with children who had been affected by the pandemic. Their moms had died. They were living with grandparents, and the people that were caring for these orphans were traditional healers and shamans and monks, Buddhist monks.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I just set off on this journey, ended up going from Borneo to Tibet overland, meeting with...
What an experience.
Yeah, this is like life-changing, because at that point, it's like, I wanted to figure out why I was here. I wanted to understand what I was doing. And ultimately, once you understand that, like, you can go as far as you need to go. Once you have that confidence and that conviction and that ability to understand yourself, it's like, you better than anyone else. And some people are still trying to figure themselves out at this stage. And I tell people, like, start as early as you can and really get down deep and figure out what it is that you want to do, because that's like the first step in getting to where you want to go.
Absolutely. I agree with you on that.
Thank you. And so I did that for a year, learned a lot about people, learned a lot about cultures, learned a lot about money. Like, I was bootstrapping this whole thing. Learned a lot about collaboration and just knowing that, there's some really great people out there who will help you get to your dreams if you give them a chance. And ultimately, if you're following the right track, like, doors will open up, like, where you can least imagine. And so that was the big learning in 2000 for me, which is exactly 20 years ago.
Wow.
I ended up at base camp, which was the coolest thing, near like Mount Everest. and ended up making my way back. I got my graduate degree in communication, culture, and technology, and my thesis was on modernizing traditional medicine. I spent the next 10 years trying to help these healers that I had learned so much from, in particular one healer in northern Thailand in Chiang Mai.
Wow.
And it was a village that was working with 600 infected, I won't say victims. They were 600 people who were affected by the virus.
Yes.
And we had raised a large sum of money in Thai baht to help this one healer understand, how to better take care of this community that he was serving. And ultimately, they didn't want the antiretroviral drugs testing. They didn't want to know. And ultimately, that was a rude awakening because, okay, they'd rather not know because of the stigma.
Yes,
and we said, what can we do with all this money that we collected and, managed to raise? And ultimately, it turned into a grassroots education and prevention initiative. And the monks had said, look, we would really like to bring this to the children and teach them about how to care for these kids so there is no stigma, or we can reduce the stigma, because the kids deserve a chance to be educated and go to school. So we ended up helping somewhere in the ballpark of like 30,000 kids over 10 years. Yeah, so it started off as like the small initiative, and then it just kept growing and growing. And meanwhile, I kept writing grants. I kept winning more money, but this time I did it in an academic setting in Stockholm, Sweden, with an incredible professor at the Karolinska Institute, who was the head of the Department of International Health. And so we were writing these large-scale grants for HIV and AIDS in Vietnam and India, and we were applying to the European Union. And after that, I just realized like my head is better suited for business.
Yes.
And I won a full scholarship to the Stockholm School of Economics MBA program. And this is where my transition happened. So I went from working with traditional healers to just really thinking about entrepreneurs and investors. And that's where like a big switch had happened for me. And this was like 2010.
Yes.
And I started working with women entrepreneurs. I won a Fulbright scholarship to the Indian Institute of Technology in Mumbai, India.
Wow.
And once I got to India, I realized there were 14 women in a country of 1.4 billion that I could interview. Now that number, like, we were talking a couple of times ago, like women not getting funded and whatnot. Like,
yes.
Imagine 14 in a country of 1.4 billion.
Wow.
And so I told my professor, I was like, I don't think I have much to do here. And he's like, no, that the real question is why? Why is this happening? And so at that point, my entire focus had shifted to access to capital. And as I got deeper and deeper into the study, it became a benchmark on women in private equity globally. The year that I was doing my Fulbright research is when the financial crisis had just happened. So I was looking at where the money was, not where the money wasn't. And the women were actually controlling large pockets of money in areas like the Middle East and Southeast Asia and Scandinavia for that matter. And so I became a subject matter expert and spent the next probably 10 years looking at women in private equity, fundraising. And then that's what brought me to where I am today with Women Investing, Women Digital. It's just how do you move those large amounts of capital to the people that need it? And ultimately, how do you change this ecosystem so that women benefit at the end of the day?
Gee, that's incredible. You had an amazing journey up until this point. It's very inspiring.
Thank you.
So as the founder of She Economy, Crypto for Kids, Crypto Queens, and Women Investing, and Women Investing in the Digital Space, where did that start?
So this is all like roughly 2010. So the whole shift happened when my daughter Arya was born.
Yes.
And ultimately, I went to India to help women entrepreneurs access capital, understand this whole space. And what I realized is there wasn't a lot of money going towards women entrepreneurs. And why is that? And as I learned about private equity, as I learned about venture capital, as I learned about who are institutional investors and sovereign funds and pension funds and family offices, it just became clear to me that, you know, the way that we're going to arrive at our goal, which is to get more women funded, is by changing the dynamics of the table where decisions are made. So this is women investing in women. This is how women investing in women got started. And for like the first 5 years, I would say, we held a lot of events around the world. Started from, let's see, Scottsdale, Arizona, where I was based, then went to Stockholm, Sweden, where I was living for many years. The Middle East, Southeast Asia, where I did my master's. You know, just various parts of Europe, like Austria. We had a huge interest in Austria. Turkey, just, I'm trying to think, like, yeah, so many conference supporters were like, yeah, can we do this here? And I'm like, sure, we can do it there. And before I knew it, like, women investing, women events were all over the world. And that was a great, you know, indication that there was a lot of support for this. But at the same time, was it the right way we were doing it? I'm not so sure. And so it was too big, too fast, too soon. And we needed to slow it down. And so in 2015, we had our last event at NASDAQ with 1,400 women talking about investing on the Nordic Stock Exchange floor in Stockholm. And at that point, I was like, okay, this is great, but there's still so many people we did not reach.
Yes.
And back then, we didn't live stream. And we didn't have a podcast network like we do now.
Yes, of course.
We didn't have social media set up. And I remember after that conference, I set up our Facebook page and we had like 500 followers from the conference. And then I was like, oh, I think what we need to do is grow this audience, because ultimately we can hit so many more if we just had the engagement. And so I created a Facebook page, which is now 980,000 followers around the world.
Amazing.
And that happened organically over time. Yes. So slowly, you know, educating people, content. It was just, back then we had the foresight to say, look, this is not scalable, and this is not, I mean, it is scalable, but at the same time, it's like, it's going to demand resources, and, you know, it's a different level of what the impact that we wanted to have. And so we went digital back in 2015, and closer to like 2017. So there was a little transition that happened in 2017. Bitcoin had started to gain traction.
Yes.
And I had a number of friends who were investing in ICOs. I don't know if you remember this craze like 2-3 years ago, where people were putting money in initial coin offerings and making money. And
yes, I remember.
and there were altcoins and things like that. And so there's this new kind of currency, and especially in Africa where you live, it's like essential, because this gives people another way to have currency that they can actually utilize without these high transaction fees and whatnot. So cryptocurrency took off in East Africa in unprecedented ways that, you know, we can't explain in other parts of the world that are still like very scared. If you give them if there's a need and there's an opportunity, then, you know, these people figured it out in Kenya. And from what I understand, Ghana is very big, and Nigeria and whatnot. So the thing that happened is it came on my radar, and I had been studying private equity at the time, like how money was working in that sphere where it's high barrier to entry. Crowdfunding, I don't know if you recall those days, but crowdfunding is super popular. And the thing about crowdfunding is it allowed women to participate more than they had because of this unaccredited clauses that, you know, the laws had changed in the US, and they said actually women can participate now. Yes. This is what's all called democratization of investing. And what cryptocurrency did is brought that to a whole nother level. It's like, you know, if you can do 10, 100, you know, $1,000, now let's bring it to like nickels and dimes. Yeah. And this is what I tell, you know, everybody, like, if you're scared of investing, start at the very, very bottom, start with something that you can lose. Maybe it's like a coffee or a drink or whatever. If you can lose $10, $20, that's what you should start learning about crypto with. And once you start to see some gains and some traction and build your confidence, then try other things. But, you know, don't go into a big deal first and say, oh, this looks good, and, you know, I'm going to put all my money in this.
Yes.
That's what I would say is highly risky. So I did that myself. In 2007, I invested in a crypto fund. I actually quintupled what I put in.
Wow.
I took my money out in like February of the next year. I didn't get greedy. I was like, you know, this is good enough, and I can pay my lawyer and pay off some investors, and
Yes.
I'm happy. Like, let me just take what I can and, you know, like be fair. And so I did that as an experiment. And then once I learned about it, I ended up at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. And I was invited to speak. I ended up speaking on like 10 panels.
Was that during Davos?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I got invited to the Cayman Islands to like this huge blockchain conference. They needed a keynote, and I said yes. So I flew from Switzerland to the Cayman Islands, which was like
too extreme.
Well, I killed my body in that trip. I was like, I will never do this again. Remind me never to do this again. But then the tricky part about this was like the flight after that was to Jerusalem, right?
Oh, wow.
So going backwards to go from Cayman to Jerusalem, I was like, you know, I hope I can walk by the time I get off this flight. This is not fun anymore. But that just started like this whole international, like, I don't even know what to call it. It was just like, I was on a plane nonstop for like the next 2 years, like flying all over the world talking about blockchain, crypto, digital assets. And that's how Crypto for Kids was born, and Crypto Queens, because ultimately women only make up 5% of crypto investors.
Yes.
And it's like across the board, there's this fear of tech and there's this fear of finance, and you combine the two and, you know, you're like, that's crypto.
Yeah.
So the girls that are, the women, I should say, not the girls, the women that are in it are such badasses, and they're just like either like ninja hackers or really, really good at, you know, like looking at financial markets and things like that. So for me, it kind of like felt natural. I like found my place in the world, and I'm like, I like tech and I like finance and I like business.
Yes.
This is kind of a cool space to be in, so why not? And so I have just been diving deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's been like 4 years now for me. And I mean, you just kind of fall in love with something, you just don't fall out, and that's basically what my story is.
That's amazing. So what would you say some of your biggest lessons in your career have been? Like, what stands out for you the most?
This is just my personality in general. I think it comes down to it as just I'm not afraid to try.
Yes.
I'm not afraid to give it a chance, and ultimately you'll figure it out if it's right for you or not. But there's people that are on the fence that are like, I don't know if this is for me. I don't know if I can do this. And you are your own worst enemy. And I am my own worst enemy sometimes because I'm a little too like, you know, jumpy that way. And, you know, I'm like, yeah, we should do it. We should try it. Let's see if it works.
Yes.
Ultimately, you're not going to change anything unless you try. And if you wait so long until you're ready, sometimes the time just goes away. You know what I mean? Like the opportunity is just gone. And it's like, oh, okay, I was waiting so long to see if it was right for me. Well, it's just not there anymore. And that kind of happened during the ICO time. Like a lot of people, you know, they mistimed it. Let me put it this way. There's pluses and minuses. When I did it, I was like, this looks good, but I'm also not to the point where I know when to stop, like what's good for me. I think you need to know your limits. And for me, I definitely do know my limits.
Okay.
Once you know that, then you can plan backwards and say, okay, I'm willing to do X, Y, and Z until I see this or until I see that.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? And so I think that's just been one of my, I would say one of the things that, you know, I'm happy to share.
Absolutely. So blockchain is something of a mystery to a lot of people, as you've highlighted, you know, earlier in the conversation. Could you give us a thumbnail sketch of the technology, its long-term implications for the IT space and your role in it?
Okay, so this is coming from Crypto for Kids, right? Ultimately,
Yes.
I'm gonna delve down to that level.
Yes.
So if I told you that once upon a time people were hesitant about using email,
Yes.
like everyone is used to corresponding using faxes, and there's like
And
safety and
posting letters.
posting letters, and
Yeah.
it's just that whole generation of like people that did not have email were like, oh, this is hard, do I need to learn how to use it? And then once they learn how to use it, it's like, oh, I can talk to you in real time on Messenger. And there was a switch from like these car phones to like mobile phones, and then it's like, oh wait, I can see people on it, or wait, I can share photos on it. And it's like every 2-3 years there's like a whole nother wave, right? It's like you
Yes.
go from having email, and then I remember when Amazon started, there was all this skepticism, like, well, who's going to shop online, who's going to buy everything online? I'm not sure if people are going to switch from store to like digital, like your now you can buy it on your phone.
Yes.
But then it was like, even on a computer, it's like, who would shop online? Yeah, I'd buy books because I know it, but I wouldn't buy clothes because what if they don't fit right? And now you've got Gilt.com and Zulily, and I think all of Aria's clothes, like for the first 2 years, came in packages because I was too lazy to go to the shop. The new mom, I was like, I don't want to deal with the counter. I don't want to deal with taking
No.
baby in. So all of her baby clothes came in online. That's the only way I know how to shop for my kid.
Yes.
And it's like their generation is all like, yeah, just buy it on Amazon, right?
Yes.
So it's like they don't know different. They're like, do we have to go to the mall? And if we go to the mall, it's like you end up spending 5 times as much as you would have. Like it's like you go to
100%. Yeah.
right, and it's kind of like, well, just buy what you need when you need it, and you can like plan your finances better that way. That's from a serial shopper. Like when I shop, I really shop, but otherwise I stay away from the malls.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to blockchain. So the thing about blockchain is it's a new technology, and ultimately it's a way for people to have better record keeping, because once it's recorded, it's something that you can't, like, it's close to impossible to undo, because it's built on technology that secures your information.
Yes.
And ultimately, like when it comes to land rights, like if you have disputes over who owns this, I mean, once you put it in the blockchain, it's like, well, it's already been recorded, we know it belongs to so and so.
Yes.
So many people in poor countries especially have disputes over land, and a lot of times it happens to be women that are at the short end of the stick. And the other issue happens to be identity. How do I know you are who you say you are, right? And so if you have your identity on the blockchain, this is another way to verify. Like there's verification methods. Could be retinal scans for one. It could be heartbeat paired to your thumbprint. Like I've been hearing about all kinds of interesting technologies.
Yes.
Cryptocurrency is one application. It's like, you have blockchains that store certain amounts of data, and cryptocurrency is built on the blockchain. So you can have blockchain without crypto, let's put it that way.
Yes.
But you can't have crypto without a blockchain,
No.
as far as I know. And this is from someone who was investing in cryptocurrency, but now like I have vested everything. Like I'm completely happy just saying, I'm following the markets and I know what's going on. But there's been a lot of volatility, like especially during COVID. Yes. For those people that invested in Ethereum, like I told Arya's dad to put money in, and it was like $140 when Ethereum, like when I told him to buy, and now it's close to like $480 or $500 within like a couple months. And then Bitcoin at the time was like 4,800, and now it's like 10,000. And there are all these people that are not like fans of of cryptocurrency, and I would say many of them are women. But can you imagine how many people could have paid rent and bought supplies and things like that had they had like some liquidity to invest back then.
Yes.
It's one of those things. So the thing with crypto and these wallets, these blockchain digital wallets, there's a couple big ones out there. One is made by Coinbase. It's like one of the more popular ones. And wallets are going to become more and more common in the future, in my opinion.
Yes.
IBM has one that they made. Like some smaller companies are making theirs. And I started to make one also for women, specifically for women. And my daughter said, Mom, what is this that you're working on? Like, you're obsessed with this thing. And I said, I'm making a wallet for women. There's so few that can invest. And she's like, can you show me what it looks like? And I sat her down and showed her on my phone, like a demo. She goes, this is really cool. She's like, so how does this work? And I'm like, well, why don't you come to this talk tomorrow? I'm Roger Ver, who's one of the original guys who started Bitcoin.com. He's going to be speaking, and then you can tell me what it is. So she comes to this meeting, and she listens and listens and listens for like an hour and a half. And then at the end, I'm like, so what do you think it is, Arya? And she's like, Mom, it's just digital money. You can buy things from Amazon and they'll ship it to your door. All it is like digital money.
Wow.
So in the eyes of a 7-year-old, right? It's like, it's that simple. And she looks over and she's like, can I have my own wallet, please? And I was like, I don't think they have a kid's wallet. She goes, well, maybe that's what you should be making. Maybe that's what you should focus on. So that's how Crypto for Kids got started. It was like, yeah, maybe we should start educating our kids about digital money. Like,
I agree, 100%.
Right? And once they figure it out, maybe they'll be the ones to teach the moms. So then it just became like this, oh, okay, so this is how we increase adoption. We start with the children and we work backwards, because ultimately it's not the women that are learning, it's the kids that are learning first.
Exactly.
So the whole thing got flipped on its head.
100%. So in 2010, you spearheaded the U.S. Department of Commerce private equity / venture capital certified trade missions to the Nordics and Middle East, representing $175 billion in private equity and venture capital interests. Can you share with us more about this, and what must have been a challenging experience? Because obviously, when you're dealing with that amount of money, it must be quite challenging.
So what was challenging is when I first started working on this, I was 3rd trimester.
Wow.
And a U.S. Department of Commerce official called me and said, you have all these contacts in Scandinavia and the Middle East. We have a number of U.S. fund managers who would like to meet with these people, meet with these investors, and we would like to develop a new model for fundraising, for helping our U.S. fund managers fundraise. What this translates into is we need money, and these markets overseas have money. And we have to figure out a way to go over to these markets and find a way to develop relationships that will translate into hundreds of millions of dollars coming back to the United States. And typically, there are these individuals called placement agents, and they come out of banks, and they come out of the private equity world where, people have deep relationships.
Okay.
And they charge 2% on whatever they raise, and sometimes a 1% follow-on fee. So there are these individuals called placement agents. And when a fund manager is raising money, they start to make these introductions, and they travel with them and go to conferences and start to make these introductions. And if you raise like $100 million, just example, that's a 2% commission, which is like $2 million, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And you're expected to cover all expenses when you're traveling. So nobody stays in under a 5-star hotel. They only go to Michelin stars for the most part. They're not taking you to Mickey D's.
No.
And basically, all of the meetings are in these really nice venues. And typically they're flying business or first, right?
Yeah.
And you can basically ask for what you want. So the thing about these placement agents is they're not that many, but they're super well connected. It's not everybody can do it. And many of them are not going to give you their Rolodex, right? They're not going to say, here you go, here's my whole list. I'm going to share it with you so you can give it to your entire, venture capital, private equity industry. And at the time, I was just getting started. So I had come out as a Fulbright scholar and I did all this research. I had tons of relationships. And ultimately, for me, it was like I wanted to see more women get funded. So I was developing these relationships. So I had the connections. And so I said to the US Department of Commerce, of course, I'd be happy to help you. And they said, we've just had a financial crisis and this is going to help our US private equity and venture capital industry. We would like to help you by introducing you to all the people that want to, go overseas. Now, if you happen to be in a market where the banks had just collapsed, there's going to be a long list of these people, right?
Yes.
Long. And so ultimately, we started off with 3 or 4, and it was me like about to give birth. Like literally I was 8 months like due. They wanted to go in November and I was due December 10th.
Yes.
And so I said, I can help you with all the contacts, but I can't get on the plane. And ultimately what happened is they had the US ambassador and the commerce officials host the meeting, and I just had to make sure that my investors were there. So this turned into a whole new model. It was like, if I can't be there in person, somebody else would be there and they would host the meeting.
Yes.
And I would get paid as an organizer, which at the time I had a new baby coming. So I'm like, sure, I'll take your, 30, 40,000 each to go on this mission. I will not take a commission and you guys can go. So it's saving the fund managers a ton of commission.
Yes.
Getting them in front of the relationships. It's helping the US government. And at the end of the day, these investors are looking for good deal flow.
Yes.
So we created this model, and then they said when I was having birth, like after I gave birth, they said, can you do this again? But this time we want to focus on Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. So we did it again.
Wow.
And then 14 funds came next time. And then they said, okay, well, now we want to go to Latin America. And another 10 funds came. And then they said, okay, now we want to go to the Middle East. So you're going to partner with this guy from Saudi Arabia who wants to work on Saudi Arabia. He's got relationships. And you can do the Sultanate of Oman, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait. So we invited people from these different cities to join us in Abu Dhabi and in Muscat, Oman. And little by little, they wanted to go to Switzerland next and France. And then there was another woman working on Australia. There was another person working on Singapore. So wherever there were like pools of capital, they would say, oh, where else should we be looking? And I'd say, maybe I'll apply for this, part of the world, whatever. And then there were other organizers that came into the mix. Long story short, this model kept repeating for a couple years. I want to say 4 or 5 years under the Obama administration.
Yes.
And each of the fund managers that I worked with, the last mission that I did, the minimum was $100 million and the largest $22 billion. And the way this works is you introduce them to a sovereign fund, for instance, and that sovereign fund decides they want to put $100 million into one fund.
Wow.
They're going to do that for the bigger funds, the fund of funds. And so the larger the fund that goes with you, the higher the tickets. So that meant somebody who was going to make these introductions had to have relationships at that level, which I had.
Yes.
And I did that because I was a Fulbright scholar looking at women in private equity, and everybody wanted to help me with this research.
Yes.
Like when I say everybody, it was like some of the largest global fund managers would say, yes, of course, we want to see more women in the private equity industry. So when I started, it wasn't that I wanted to be a placement agent, or it wasn't that, I was working for a bank. It was literally for a research project. So this turned into something much bigger because I was open-minded and I was willing to take the risk, and I was willing to share my network and my contacts.
And that's huge, because that's worth a fortune.
That's worth a fortune. And so what ended up happening is this turned into like, you know, multiple funds. I had 40 funds that I worked with by the time I left. And each of them, you can imagine, are representing billions of dollars. And so that portfolio that I had was worth over $175 billion. How much did I actually raise? It's probably over $1 billion, maybe more,
Wow.
because they're still going back with the same relationships. And one of my agreements that I had with the Commerce Department is I am not allowed to take commission, which meant that I not only lost the 2% in the first round, I lost any subsequent, like if they went back 3 or 4 times and they actually got money, I would never see that money, right? It's just like I sold out for like 20, 30,000, 50,000 sometimes. For me, that was the seed capital I needed for women investing, women digital. So I didn't have to go to an early stage VC and say, please, can I have this much? And, you know, you can take 30% equity in my company. I had enough to fund myself. But ultimately, people who have these relationships will not compromise. They're like, if I raised $1 billion for you, that's $20 million in my bank account. Why would I give up $20 million in my right mind?
Yeah, exactly.
So now the funny thing is, the commerce official that I worked with, he started the same business coincidentally. So I'm like, yeah, I bet it was real lucrative. You know, you now have the contacts, and why would you share now? You know, it's like, ultimately, it's like men invest in men, right? And once you have these contacts, you can do whatever you want with them. And ultimately, if that's what you want to keep doing, you will keep doing it. But I think there's something much bigger. And there's a role for us women. Number one, like once we have that access, it's our duty to help other women.
Absolutely. I agree with you. So that leads me to where we are currently, which is COVID-19, which has obviously turned our world upside down and inside out. How has this impacted you personally, and how is your business, and how have you adapted? And can you give us some examples?
Sure. So COVID for me put me into like super high gear. And when I say that, it's like for the past 6 years, we've been building a digital business. We've been building our social media audience, as I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
We created a digital magazine, which we never launched. It's just been like, with me, it has to look right, feel right, be right, smell right, you know, taste right, everything.
Yes.
And at this point, the digital magazine has been perfected. It's turning into, it's the World Women Report. It's going to come out quarterly. It's beautiful. It's so good. And we had multiple designers work on it. And we're now at a point now where we're ready to launch. We have an entire digital newsletter that's about to come out soon. We're now looking for brands that want to partner with us to reach this huge demographic that we have globally. A lot of millennials, but also a high number of ultra high net worth women that are part of our group. So if there's brands out there that are listening, this is like the time to contact me or Karen and find me. Yes. But most importantly, what happened during COVID is initially I had my own podcast, Karen. I don't know if you know this, but it was called Women Investing in Women and Girls. And Women Investing Women and Girls, my first co-host was my babysitter, Michelle Jaffe.
Oh, wow.
My nanny was the producer, and Aria was 2.5 at the time. She would come on and say, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the show. And she was in her stroller, and we would go to Voice America Studios every Saturday and record. And we had Princess Rima of Saudi Arabia with her daughter on air. We had the former Deputy Prime Minister of Sweden with her granddaughter on air.
That's incredible. Wow.
Thank you. The head of Intel Women and Girls, UNICEF, the executive director of UN Women, a lot of women entrepreneurs. So we had like 100 shows that we did with Voice America Kids. And the girls did great. Michelle got into Wharton School of Business. She just graduated last year. Avery's at Stanford now. Sheikha ended up at a very reputable school, and I can't disclose where she is because she's royalty.
Yes, of course.
And Aria spoke at the United Nations last June on crypto for kids.
Wow.
So all the girls did amazing, and I had been planning to launch a podcast network, and this was on the back burner. And I was traveling around the world for the past 3 years, as I told you, and My last meeting was actually in February, on February 29th of this year. And it was supposed to be in Toronto hosting Sir Richard Branson at a dinner that my friend had organized. It was a huge conference and it didn't happen because of COVID.
Yes.
And I had another meeting in Portugal on my birthday, March 29th, with Horasis. It's like another Davos, and it was in Portugal in Cascais. That got canceled. And so I was stuck at home homeschooling like every other mom that I know.
Yes.
And at that moment in time, I was like, maybe we should start thinking about our podcast network. This could be a good time to revisit. And back in November, I had put out an announcement saying who would like to be on the State of Women podcast network. And we have close to 1 million followers now because we've been building over 5 years now. And within an hour, I got 150 responses.
Wow.
And I had contacted each and every single one of these people and said, yes, you can be on our network. And my tech guys were like, okay, I know, we're not equipped, but we'll get, the back end ready. And so they spent a couple months getting it ready. And then in February, when we heard about COVID, I was like, maybe we should do some content around health and wellness. And so we started another announcement, another call for shows around health and wellness. And so now we have close to 300 shows. And I have a team in India that's building a mobile app for us. And this mobile app is going to be on Android. It's going to be on iOS and one other new platform called Kaios.
Oh, wow.
And Kaios is going to reach the next billion. And these are people using $10 phones in Africa, in South Africa, in Tanzania, Rwanda, Uganda, India, Indonesia, Malaysia. They all have Kaios-based phones. And so our podcast app, when your shows are ready, once you have an RSS feed, and any listeners out there, if you have your own podcast and you think you've got some interesting content for our women's audience, global women's audience, feel free to reach out to me. But we're now just about getting ready to submit to Google Play Store and Apple Store, and we should be in all 3 stores by the end of this year. And our goal is to get these apps out on to this next billion, and they could be listening to your content and learning. So you've got 900 million girls who are out of school right now, and Zoom is sometimes working, not working, depending if they have a computer.
Yes.
So what I'm working on is Sheconomy, which is this new suite of apps that are actually designed for the next billion. And ultimately, if they have a smartphone, that's great. You can still access it like you access Spotify or iTunes or Pandora or whatever. But for those people who've not had access, this is your ticket. And now you can start to listen to all this amazing content by women that were designed just for you. And
that's incredible. And you're amazing. Wow.
So
wow.
This is basically, I think, how 2021 should start. And
100%.
Yeah, and one thing that really just disturbs me right to this day is on September 22nd, 2020, the UN General Assembly started. It was their 75th anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
Not a single woman spoke on the first day. This is the same, one of the highest level organizations that promotes gender equality, reduced inequalities as part of their sustainable development goals. And I'm not really interested in what the reason was. But we're in the middle of a pandemic, global pandemic. Women are suffering in droves, and 70% of the healthcare workers are women. And there's so much that we've done to take care of our loved ones and our families. I mean, at least one woman speaker would have been appropriate, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And there's still, like you say, I think there's still so much division and so much inequality, and there needs to be so much more done about this, because it's seriously lacking. Which leads me to the next question, or it's relevant to what we're discussing. So women investing in women is one of the most successful and powerful platforms. Why is less than 5% of funding in a multi-billion-dollar VC industry made in women? And what mistakes do you believe women make? And what obstacles do they face when looking for funding?
So I will speak from just diving into this for the past 10 years. A lot of women have women-only networks, or for the most part, women networks.
Yeah,
and
first mistake, right?
Beg pardon?
I said that's the first mistake.
Yes, I mean, to keep like your circle, like you really, like if you're thinking about accessing capital at some point, you really have to broaden your base of who has money from the very beginning.
Yes.
Especially if you don't come from money or have money, like independently wealthy, or you don't have savings. Like I put aside several years worth, like many years worth of self-funding, just in the event that, you know, I didn't want to be in a position to take money from people that weren't the right investor. Let's put it that way. And this is the worst mistake I think a lot of women do, is they give up too much too soon to the wrong people. And you're not in a position of leverage if you don't have that cushion. So that's number one. Secondly, I think this co-founder business, it sometimes holds women back. And I've had several friends who've raised successfully, but they had, you know, the wrong co-founder, and this will ultimately affect, you know, who and how you raise from. And it's just, it complicates the situation. Sometimes it works out to your advantage, but I've seen it go the other way. And then ultimately, you know, there is this issue of speaking to the wrong investors from the onset. And I'm guilty of that too. Like I wasted my time on this one investor who I thought would come in, and it was several months, and it was clear that, you know, they didn't have any intention. And I just said to them, like, you know, I don't think your values are aligned with mine, and, you know, it's better that we end this now. And they were like, oh, well, you know, we can fix this. And at a certain point, if they're not in from the beginning, and you have this sense that it's the wrong, you know, the wrong fit, you have to use that judgment call. So, you know, calling it like it is from the beginning, that's kind of the issue. And then also, it's like, who are you raising capital from? Like really start to diligence, really start to screen, and start to build those relationships really early. There's no shortage of money out there. I'll put it that way. And if it means you have to develop relationships with people who have those relationships, then do that.
Yes.
Right? But at the end of the day, trying to do it yourself, it's going to be very hard. And then doing it with the wrong people, like you talking to your mother and your sister and your best friend, that's not gonna,
never a good idea.
No, but that's typically what happens. It's like, that circle is like, oh, well, I don't know what happened. Well, talk to the people that know that person and find out what went wrong, and then don't make that same mistake over and over again. So it's part of this is to like really, you know, be very clear on what's going to help you progress. And if there's something seriously wrong, figure out what that is. And sometimes it's a product related thing, you can fix that. Sometimes it's a team related thing, you can fix that. But if you don't know, you're going to get stuck. And I think that's one of the issues. And then also this whole element, and I can't overemphasize this, it's the fear of not like going out and connecting with the people that have the access or the money.
Yes.
So don't be afraid. If you have to throw fear out the door immediately.
Yes.
If you want to be successful, it's got to go out that door.
100%. So, how has your educational background and exposure to many other business cultures influenced your career?
I think it's been an asset overall. And ultimately, I spent part of my childhood in Hyderabad, India. I lived in a Muslim neighborhood in the middle of like a Hindu state. I don't know how to explain this. Hyderabad is a Muslim state capital. It's an anomaly in most of South India and other parts of India for that matter. We have a huge Muslim base because that's where the Nizam rulers decided to end their rule, I should say. They didn't go further than that part in South India. So we have a lot of cultural advantages, I would say. Like the food is amazing for one. Of course, I'm going to talk about food right now.
Of course.
But beyond that, it's like you learn a lot about this different religion and way of life. And it so happens that many of the people that I went to school with when I was in India, they had relatives in Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Bahrain and Oman. And I was fascinated from that age about the Middle East,
Okay.
where I tend to do business now. I was like, when I get older, I'm going to go there for sure. And I was like, wow, this place is amazing. It's incredible. And because I had that cultural connection, I think I was able to develop relationships faster than most people. And I speak a language. And the interesting thing is, like, whenever I land in Dubai, majority of the people driving me around are either from Bangladesh, India, or Pakistan.
Wow.
And they speak Hindi. So I get around by speaking Hindi, and I'm the best backseat DJ there is in Dubai.
Love it.
And so it's like, you know, it's the second home, kind of like when I land there. And the same applies to Oman, and the same applies to Saudi Arabia. Like, I got by speaking Hindi, and ultimately they can navigate in ways that no one can. Like, if I had to go, you know, to certain offices, I would speak Hindi with the driver, and I would let somebody in the office speak Hindi with my driver, you know. And it was like, I felt comfortable. And that's the key. Like, as a single woman on business, you really have to be comfortable in your surroundings, which I was.
Yes.
Being from that part of the world, it's like such a gift, because you have the advantages of the Western world, and you also have the advantages of the Eastern world. And to throw this for another loop, I lived in Singapore, and I did that incredible life journey, you know, from Borneo to Tibet overland. So I know Asia very well. Like, I'm very comfortable being in Asia. I speak Swedish. I got my MBA there in Stockholm. And so any part of Scandinavia is like, you know, I can call myself Annika and people wouldn't know the difference. They would, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's super comfortable just being in that setting. So I feel like at this stage, I'm a cultural chameleon.
Yes.
And wherever
global citizen.
Global citizen. And I think you lived in Norway for a while, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. That's where we actually met.
We met in Norway?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
We met in Oslo. You weren't well.
That's right. Okay, so this was during Catapult, I think. I think it was Catapult Festival.
Yes.
And it was like getting off a plane. I think I was coming in from Australia. Again, one of these stupid trips. Like, why would I do this? It was like literally 4 continents in a week.
Yes.
Flying from the US, and we went via Hong Kong to Australia, then back to Norway. That's when you and I met.
Yes.
I was dead. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was cold, and I think you had the flu or something.
Yeah, by then it was some combination of airline food and weather change.
But it was amazing because we've known each other for years and communicated for years, but that was the first time we actually physically met. So
amazing. Norway. Yeah, so Norway is like an easy place to love. Like, it's super easy to just fall into.
Yeah.
Sweden was a little bit more difficult. It was like, I showed up in August and it was super, super hot when I arrived in Sweden. And then a month later, it was like cold, dark, and freezing. And it was, you know, shock to the system. And so I think, you know, Scandinavia, I miss it. It's been the longest time since I've been away from either Stockholm or Oslo. Like, this year with COVID, I haven't been able to travel that much. But I think, you know, learning what I learned from that part of the world in terms of gender equality.
Yes.
And when I did my MBA there, and then I went to India right after, I think women investing in women digital would not have happened had I not spent those 4 years in Stockholm. Like, when I walked out of Sweden at that moment in time, I was like, why can't every country be like this? You know, this is like an honest to God global benchmark in terms of how women should be treated. And even if like they don't get like the best opportunities, the men realize it and they do something about it, or they try to do something
yeah.
about it, right?
But don't you find, like, in Scandinavia, because this is what I found, is that initially when you go there, it's kind of hard, because not hard, but it's just because they've a much more conservative culture. Once you sort of break through those barriers, you make the greatest connections and friends, and people, and build a network. And I find that, having the diversification, obviously not as much as you have in, having lived in Asia and so on, but just having that diversification, because when you then deal or go on to, work with people, they become, clients of yours or collaborators, it makes it so much easier because you understand how to approach each culture. So I don't know if you found that.
I think it's tough initially, and especially when I showed up newly married. I was only married for like 3 weeks. I met my husband 3 weeks before we got married, and we showed up, and it was like new marriage, new country, new like everything. And it was literally like my one friend in the entire country was this man I just married. And we had met, to be fair, we met when I was 2 and he was 4, like when we were very little kids in a Hindu temple, and then got married years later. But still, like, it was part of like being in like a wonderland experience. It's like, at first it's like, where are we? And this is just utopia on so many levels. It's beautiful, and there's so much nature and culture and this and that. So I think for me, the people didn't have a lot to do with it. I was just still trying to settle into like what I was doing there in the first place. And it happened suddenly in my situation. Like, I had not planned Sweden, and many people would ask, like, why are you here? And I'd say, love refugee. I'm a love refugee. That's why I'm here. and then they'd be like, oh, what are you going to do here? And I said, good question, I don't know. And little by little, I figured it out. I was like, oh. And then it was like, okay, how am I going to make friends? And I realized, I'm going to do something for someone else. I'm very good at philanthropy. And so I was like organizing concerts and benefits and things like that. And I just loved doing that. And I met a lot of people through that. And a lot of my closest friends they were all like, this girl just showed up, and, she's here organizing all these things, and that's how she's making connections. And by the time we left Sweden, we had like hundreds of friends, like hundreds.
Yes.
And then, you slowly learn the language, and then, they insist on speaking English because everybody's like, their English is perfect.
Yes.
I'm like, stop speaking English with me because I'll never learn Swedish. And, Arya's dad only speaks English, so it's not like we're speaking Swedish at home. And so I was like, oh, that was the hardest part, I would say, for me. But if I had a chance to do it all over again, which I'm hoping will happen soon,
yes,
I would do it completely differently this time. Like, I would have lots of dinner parties with Indian food, and people would come running. I know it.
Yes. Absolutely. So that leads me to leadership, or lack of leadership, which is obviously a big subject of late. So what do you believe makes your leadership style different, and what do you believe needs to change, both from an entrepreneurial perspective, but also on a global scale, to improve the current narrative?
I think more women need to step up and stop being worried about what other women are going to think.
Yes.
Period. And this comes down to you have to be prepared for many people to hate you.
Yes.
Right? And whenever you see strong women leaders, there's always an objection. You're going to get it from the men for sure, but it's honestly what other women say and do that's the hard part. And this happens with celebrities often.
Yes.
And you'll see this happening with, women in other positions of power and influence. The first part is like, be prepared to lose many friends, make lots of enemies, and get prepared for for a lot of negative things people are going to say about you.
Yes.
And
but I think that goes without saying, just because, you know, when you are changing and creating change, like you said, there's always going to be some level of resistance. And
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But especially with women leaders, many women are afraid of what people think still. And
Yes.
It's like they don't want to hurt feelings. They don't want to hurt people's feelings, and they care about what people say.
Yeah, 100%. So what have been some of your biggest career highlights?
Biggest career highlights. Let me think. I want to say like when I was doing the trade missions, it was amazing because I had stepped into these shoes that I would say not very many women would do. And it was creating an innovative, disruptive model, right? And at that moment in time, I knew there were a lot of men. Like I was like early 30s, and majority of the people that were coming along with us were in their 60s, 70s.
Oh yeah, big difference.
Big difference. And it's a lot of money and it's a lot of power at the table. And it was, you know, this woman who just gave birth, and you know, an Indian woman that too, in the Middle East, doing what I was doing. It's unheard of. It's unheard of. And that too, like I grew up in a culture, in a family, like we're Hindus, right? And Hindus and Muslims have this tension, like with India, Pakistan, and a very traditional South Indian family. To be able to do this and lead this kind of a delegation in the Middle East, it's like incredibly unheard of, right?
Yes.
Like we've always been on opposite sides of the table, and they'd be like, you know, of course you would never step into Saudi Arabia. Well, yes, I'm leading a delegation there, so I kind of have to go.
Yeah.
Right? So ultimately it's one of these things where it was unplanned, but it happened. And I think doing the same thing in Scandinavia, like I had never planned on being in Sweden.
No.
I had never planned on getting an MBA there. I had never planned on, you know, developing the network that I did. I created a foundation in Stockholm. We had 3,000 Nordic entrepreneurs that were there before I left Sweden. I created this during my MBA year with the backing of all of the largest Nordic funds. While I was doing an MBA, I didn't speak Swedish, right? And to have that created before I left with the help and support of some of the most incredible Nordic entrepreneurs and business leaders, I would say that was pretty amazing. And it's not every day that someone that steps into this foreign country, doesn't speak the language, and, you know, leaves like that. So ultimately, I took a lot of risks. They didn't always work, but, you know, when they did work, they worked out great. And what more can you do other than try, you know? And
exactly.
If it helps some people, then wonderful. But I think the biggest highlight's going to be what I'm about to create now with these mobile apps that are going to reach hopefully 1 billion women around the world.
That's amazing. Very exciting.
Thank you.
So what are the 3 key pieces of advice you would give to other entrepreneurs? And what legacy would you like to leave, or how would you like to be remembered?
I would like to leave and be remembered for the woman who is willing to push her limits as far as they can go.
Yes.
And at this moment in time, I think I'm on track to doing that. And I have a young daughter, and, you know, I want her to be inspired and stay and be inspiring herself. And ultimately, you know, if I can make this world a better place for her, that would be, you know, something that I'd feel very satisfied with. And it's not just her, it's other little girls also.
Of course.
And so that keeping that goal in mind, I think it's something actionable. I think it's something achievable. I think it's something that we can all do, small steps, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And what advice would I give to other entrepreneurs is really watch your finances and be super detailed down to the bare minimum. Like if you were to be left with like $100 or $200, how long could you survive, and what would you do to make that dollar last as long as you can, basically.
Yeah.
Because it's going to happen, because that's the nature of entrepreneurship. You're going to take risks, and sometimes it's going to be over your head, but how are you going to keep stretching? And without grit and perseverance, you're not going to keep going, and it's going to get frustrating, and you really have to be in love with what you're doing. Otherwise it just won't sustain itself. Like, that's the oxygen, is you have to be inspired and very passionate about what you're doing. Otherwise you cannot keep going. And then when it gets really hard, like I spoke to a girlfriend of mine, she's like, it's like walking into the ocean and you feel like you're getting closer and closer and the water's getting higher and higher.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, what do I do? And I said, you're going to have to learn how to breathe.
Yes.
And at a certain point, like, it's going to get so hard. You're going to have to learn how to breathe. And either you can figure that out or develop a very close relationship with God, which is what I'm doing now. And it's the truth, because I've just been praying, because some of these things are just out of your control. And it's like, what do we do now? And like, we have to pray. And before, I used to call Thailand and say, call the monks, like, tell them to swing those wheels as fast as they can, beat the gongs, whatever they need to do, just do it. But like, we need some help from a higher power. And if you don't ask, you don't get. So make sure you develop that relationship early and often. And that's all you can do.
Absolutely. So I want to thank you so much for your time and for, and just really sharing your journey, which is just mind-blowingly incredible as far as I'm concerned. But that's just my opinion. But I think it's amazing. I think what you're doing is super inspiring and going to help a lot of not only young girls, but female entrepreneurs and those looking to pursue their own ventures. So if people want to connect with you, what is the best platforms to do so?
So I would recommend you go to thestateofwomen.com, thestateofwomen.com.
Okay.
And it's either thestateofwomen.org or thestateofwomen.com. Sign up for the newsletter. We'll have lots of announcements there. Contact info we're launching a new newsletter soon, and there'll be contact info and updates and things there. You can find me on LinkedIn. If I can't accept a LinkedIn request, just follow me and send me a private message, and hopefully I'll get it.
Yes.
And Facebook always works. You can try facebook.com/womeninvesting or facebook.com. I believe it's Anu Bhardwaj.
Yes.
So there as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we can have you back in the future to share or see where you are in your journey. And yeah, just thank you so much for inspiring so many people.
Thank you, Karen. I really appreciate you following up with me, and I hope you have everything you need and keep doing what you're doing, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much.
Okay, my dear.
Bye.